Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second Interreligious Forum of the Americas. We are joined by guests both in person and online, so welcome. My name is David Price. I serve as the Director of Racial Equity for the Los Angeles Civil Human Rights and Equity Department. I'm also an ordained minister and a former youth pastor. And today I have the honor to moderate this concurrent session on the topic of youth interreligious cooperation to fight racism in the Americas. But first, I would like to take a moment to thank the co-organizers of this event, the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs at Georgetown University, my alma mater, Hoya Saxa, the G20 Interfaith Forum, the International Center for Law and Religion Studies at BYU Law School, the Interreligious Council of Southern California, and Religions for Peace. We thank these organizations for their efforts to bring this dynamic panel of speakers and experts together. Today, the Americas are reckoning with the legacy of colonialism and the slave trade, as well as their enduring consequences for indigenous and Afro-descendant peoples. From the introduction of religious texts to justify European settlement, to the involvement of religious institutions in the eradication of beliefs and forced assimilation of indigenous peoples, to the slavery of Africans. The history of faith communities in the Americas is inextricably linked into the subjugation and the marginalization of indigenous and Afro-descendant peoples. But despite this legacy, faith communities were also critical in movements to abolish slavery and combat racial discrimination. The intersection of youth and interfaith cooperation is crucial to advance the fight against racism, and we know this because opposing racism is an integral part of religious identity for many young people throughout the Americas. And so joining me to have this discussion today are three distinguished experts who will share their ideas and provide a clearer understanding about how our youth across our continents are addressing racism and how you can help them to do so. So immediately to my left is Lehia Matamoros. She is representing the Latin American Catholic Youth Pastoral Ministry, and she is also a coordinator for the Religions of Peace, Latin America, and Caribbean Youth Network. Next to Lehia is Tahil Sharma. He is the regional coordinator for North America for the United Religions Initiative, and he is also a fellow at A Common Word Among the Youth, which is a global youth movement that brings together young changemakers from diverse backgrounds who are committed to interfaith action and peace building. And finally, we have Mambo Florence Jean Joseph, who is the Gueto Day for the state of New York, the National Confederation of Haitian Voodooists, which is a Haitian civil organization which seeks to defend the practice of Haitian voodoo from defamation and persecution. And so today we'll begin by having our panelists share a few minutes of their initial thoughts about our topic. Lehia.
To begin, first, I'd like to thank all the organizers for this invitation. I'm very happy to share with David, Flores, and Tahid with this force that is especially dedicated to youth, and it's a very challenging subject. Within this forum, we have heard many times for each one of us who are here, and of course for all the communities we represent, each person in the world has a lot of value. All of us are clear about what our faith says in terms of dignity of all humans, and our responsibility to work for that is very important, helping to build a dignified life for all. We have heard so many times and in so many ways, and this has been very motivated. However, I cannot help being a bit worried because it's been something difficult for us in the past, and it's still difficult now to have this clarity that our faith is asking from us. I don't want with this to demerit the actions that many of us within our communities do and do with very inspiring processes, and they're very coherent. However, this is not, unfortunately, a generalized attitude in our communities. There are many people who seem to be authorized by their faith to push nationalism and to treat badly people who think differently. We need then to be very honest and to accept that in the past, many serious mistakes and abuses, injustices have been made and pushed discrimination, such as racism. And we thought we had finished with this, but it's still happening. We need to recognize that if it is necessary, we need to ask for forgiveness for the things we have done in the past. This should touch our hearts because in our communities of faith, we are involved in this, not only because of the attitudes we might see in now, but also because of the silences and people who were not there in many situations of injustices, and we need to be clear about this. I was saying at the very beginning that I was happy that this issue is put as a challenge for youth because youth and their world has the capacity to create spaces where transformative attitudes can be pushed, where there's valor, attitude, the community, reflection, and society. We are aware that the youth is important for our peoples. They have capacities for dreaming, feelings, and solidarity towards those who suffer. Youth spaces within our communities allow us to find each other, to recognize the different faces of who are around us, to respect and value each other, to have the capacity to make our circles bigger, broader, and to include those who are part of our world and those who are close to us and have solid relationships within those people who believe this path can be joined together. This is a challenge to go through this situation, especially when we open to situations of youth participating as interreligious faith. And we have to have more clear what is the social meaning of existence, the meaning of brethren, solidarity of each person, and the need for love, to love everyone, to break walls and build bridges. Youth people have huge values such as faith, charity, and love, to have the possibility of building another kind of civilization, the one of love.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your opening statement. And you touched on so many amazing topics, from youth having the space and the capacity to dream and to transform our society, and really addressing this authority that people have based off of their religion to treat others differently or badly. And so I really appreciate you bringing these topics to light. Tahil, would you like to go next?
Good morning, everyone. First and foremost, I'd like to thank my fellow panelists for being here. Bienvenidos. Bienvenue. I'm very thankful to be with the panelists of women who are experts in getting to talk about the work on the ground. And I need to acknowledge the fact that oftentimes in these kinds of conversations, we don't often get to center women, young people, and indigenous people in these conversations. So the fact that they're here is more important for me than anything else. But secondly, I would like to also acknowledge something that I wish the forum organizers did consider, which was the fact that we are on the lands of the Gabrieleños, the Tongva Nation, and the Chumash people. If we are going to have any conversation about indigenous communities, we need to know whose lands we're on, who are the stewards here, and who offer us the privilege of being able to have this conversation today. So I wanted to center that in this space today before I start my remarks. I first started getting involved in interfaith work in 2012 after the shooting of a Sikh temple or a gurdwara in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. This temple was attacked by a white supremacist. He walked in on a Sunday morning during congregational services and began to shoot at the congregation. 7 people died. An officer was injured, almost losing his voice, with 15 gunshot wounds to the chest and the neck. And the first question that the world asked about our community was, who are the 6? Who are the people that were attacked? I was deeply disturbed by the idea that we still had to define who we were in a conversation about protecting our communities. And it informed an understanding of what does it mean to show protection to your own community. I wanted to immediately make people understand what Sikhism was. But I then remembered that this is not new for American history. This is not new for the experience of many communities on the ground. If I was going to be committed to interfaith cooperation, it would have to be with a commitment for mutual solidarity and support for every other community that was suffering. It would include my community members who, for centuries, whose ancestors were enslaved and brought to these lands, have to now suffer through the systems of racial injustice. It meant protecting those indigenous communities who continue to suffer to this day, even because of the pandemic, because of COVID-19, as a part of a larger conversation on reparations. It also meant my fellow Latinx community members, my fellow Asian community members, many of the other folks that make the United States so diverse. And in the 10 years of doing this work of interfaith cooperation, I keep asking myself, where do we keep going wrong? Why do I feel that interfaith cooperation is not being effective? And I've had this conversation with many young people, with many religious leaders, with political leaders, and with folks who observe from the outside doing the work of justice and community organizing. And 2 things kind of stuck out that are going to make people in the room uncomfortable, but that have to really center some important points on how we can do this work better. The first is that interfaith cooperation, unfortunately, in the 21st century centers white supremacy, period. The centering of white supremacy is not necessarily intentional, but when the resources, the leadership, the power, and the opportunities to make this work possible are centered on white comfort and fragility, we have a tendency to not see this work be as effective as it needs to be. And therefore, we land in situations where the work of interfaith cooperation becomes a work of neutrality, and at times it becomes the work of apathy. This work is something really important to challenge because as someone who is a person of color, as someone who has a bisexual orientation, as someone who is first-generation Indian American, and as someone who comes from 2 religious backgrounds, Hinduism and Sikhism, I don't see myself in all of the other spaces that I work with. I work at an organization called the United Religions Initiative, which has almost 1,100 chapters in 113 countries. When we talk about grassroots work and its power, it means a lot to us. And I work as the regional coordinator for North America, where I work with about almost 100 organizations in the US and Canada. But when most of these organizations profess the work of interfaith cooperation, the only diversity that they seem to do pretty well is that of religious diversity. It doesn't often include indigenous voices. It doesn't often include people of different skin colors, let alone aiming for anything else. And that's where that unintentional white supremacy comes into play, because we don't acknowledge that the conditions of the people that we're trying to help aren't even represented in the rooms that need to have those voices. And if we don't learn to center them, we're not actually doing the work of interfaith cooperation. But the second thing that we need to address in this is the deeper discomfort of something I call the theology of convenience. It's this idea that we use our religion and our spirituality as an attempt to be able to talk about the things we only want to talk about, and the minute it doesn't become relative to us, they get thrown out of the room. And oftentimes the conversations of indigenous communities and racism and white supremacy don't get talked about because the conversation is too difficult. It is too political. It is not relevant to the work of the organization itself, when at some points it can be the deep-seated part in that organization's function. And we come to realize that in the work of doing interfaith work, which is learning about others, which is increasing our literacy, which is building bridges and relationships, which is ultimately supposed to lead to justice and equity, don't find the light of day because we're not willing to get uncomfortable with people who have different views and approaches and ways of doing this work. When it comes to the acknowledgement of racism, both at the systemic and at the cultural level, there are many interfaith organizations that I know of that do this work wrong, that don't center the voices correctly. And there's a story of a cooperation circle member by the name of Vasu Bandhu, who lives in Mexico, actually, who talked about his experience in both Mexico and the United States of seeing white supremacy at the face of what is going on in interfaith work. Vasu is someone who is a dear friend of mine. He used to be a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints and then became a Zen monk. Living in Mexico City, he is often considered someone who is white passing, but reflected on the fact that his white passing existence made him more trustworthy to the people that he talked to, made him more accessible to the folks that would offer him help, that would be able to offer him resources and help him do the work that he does. And that unfortunately, in coming to the United States and now living in Arizona, working for an organization called the Arizona Faith Network, he often finds some of those experiences on the ground with other folks that he works with, where he gets challenged both by the fact that because he's lighter skinned, that he's going to be treated differently, but that because he is someone from Mexico, he has lost some form of confidence in people working with him. Because the simple fact that he comes from another country can be a problem to some people. And people often use the theology of convenience to abuse interfaith spaces in an attempt to acknowledge that inclusion is okay so long as we keep the topics of unity and peace. And they are then used as buy-ins to be able to do the work less productively than we're willing to own. And what we're here to challenge today as a part of this conversation is how, in the context of young people particularly, can we challenge the status quo of this supremacy and this convenience to make sure that we're actually living up to the full potential of what interfaith cooperation actually looks like? Thank you.
Tahil, thank you so much. I'm deeply interested in this theology of convenience and increasing and building bridges by getting uncomfortable. I think that's really important. Thank you so much for your opening statements. Next, we'll have Mambo Florence. You have 7 to 10 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. I need to thank my ancestors from far and near, and one ancestor who just traveled, Mambo Florence George Auguste, whose work I'm continuing in. And I'm very happy and grateful to be here. And I'm especially grateful for all the efforts that were made in trying to get me here, first by finding my information and make sure I got here safe and all the particulars. And I say it's a blessing. And thank you for sharing the space. And it seems like, as we say, we are all one. So we experience the same joy, the same privileges, and the same suffering. But listening to you guys, it seems like I can only add this. I will start with Leviticus 19 at verse 18. That says, "Thou shalt not avenge, nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord." In my journey as a Mambo, I was constantly reminded to have compassion for the world, even though the world may not have compassion for me, and to always be the witness of the beauty and love of the Supreme Being. As such, I'm not going to discuss the issues of racism, nor colonialism or slave trade. Knowing the truth does not give us the privilege to be right or to be always right, as there are many layers and perception of the truth. But I will share my experience with you. As Father Serrano just said, focus on the person. I know we all mean well in doing the work, but like we've been hearing over and over, is the dialogue. We need to hear and listen. What is my problem? How do I perceive this issue? How I'm living this experience? And this is what I will try to do with you as a spiritual and religious leader and a parent to many. I will mention, though, that we know the faith communities are of critical importance in the fight against such evils. However, as wrong was done to the indigenous Black people and their descendants, our children have indirectly experienced a traumatic intergenerational dissociation of their DNA and continue to experience trauma till this day. For example, they are constantly being hunted by security forces. And we experience the symptom of not being able to live a long life. And every day my son leaves home, I'm praying and worried, and I said, he's a child of God. So I just give in and surrender. But as a human being living, as a divine being living a human experience, we worry. We worry because we have experienced that type of experience. I don't want to keep repeating it, so I don't give it more body and power. And as religious leaders, we don't want to gear toward an academic exercise, but we want to exchange ideas for solution in engaging in meaningful discussion and efforts to collectively process this wrong. As such, we need to identify not only the enemies, but also the limits of the major and minor Western faiths that perpetuate overall oppression. Assuming that faith communities can make it easier to engender conditions that promote healing and reconciliation. But in my view, faith alone promotes resignation, which is why, for a vaudouisan, it's not simply a matter of faith, but a matter of action. Symbolic, ritualistic, and/or actual. I can share my understanding of generally Western religious denominations as they can be intolerant, and in the case of Haiti, often murderers in preaching or simply speaking their truth. More importantly, faith cannot address the history and ramifications of slavery and colonialism, which have not ended. Overall, hate and racism are real for me, as we know they are learned and seem to be deeply rooted in history. So we need to bring our youth to the table to help fight racism. It's an endless quest. We constantly and incrementally have to ask for more inclusion. And even when such inclusion is legislated, the hearts and ways of those we have to live with may still be complicit in the perpetuity of de facto racism. And I know some of us are not aware of it, but it's real. It's uncomfortable, and we don't want to bring guilt or fear, but we need to put it out so we can all understand what could trigger that experience of racism. To bring the youth to the table, we need to identify where those entities are. Where are they? We need to find them. they are living, actually living, as my son would say, Mommy, you don't understand. Mommy, you don't understand. I see it, but he's living it as a 26-year-old. I get emotional, but we must go on. And as far as international organization, community, faith, organization, faith leaders, spiritual leaders, we need to get together. We cannot be politically correct. We are witnesses of the Supreme Being, who is love, respect, and dignity. We need to get to the core and the essence of things if we want to really make things comfortable and not being able to inconvenience or exactly make you feel uncomfortable. So we really need to get to the core because we need to bring the youth who is going to continue our work and make this world a better world, which I believe in. This world I want to see. We want to create a safe space for them where they can feel comfortable to speak their story. Their story, the dialogue is important. And then we can get together to gather the resources to help them, educate them, give them the resources, and so we need to find a way to get everybody connected. Communication, the skills, the tools, and overall, the presence. Don't look at it, this is not my child, this is not my problem. It's our problem. It's our issue. And as we get together to identify the problems, then we can discuss points of healing. We need to heal, we need to reconcile, and we need to forgive ourselves. We cannot be strict judges on ourselves. We need to find a space of peace within ourselves first. And peace will radiate over people around us. Love thyself as you are a gift of God. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. These opening statements are so dynamic, so on point, and so many themes have sort of come up. Mambo Florence mentioned that racism and colonialism, they have not ended, right? Tahil even mentioned this idea of having to address what's real, right? Not just coming together just to talk about the peace and to come together in a kumbaya moment, but in order to actually create a kumbaya moment, you actually have to address the root causes, what's underneath the surface. And so with that in mind, how can interreligious youth networks come together to address the enduring challenges of indigenous and Afro-descendant peoples as it relates to racism, as it relates to colonialism? What can youth networks be doing to come together to mobilize and do this work? Anyone can start.
Okay. Like I say, the most important thing is to identify me as a person. Like, we each perceive things in our own way, within our culture, our basic foundation. And I will always refer to my son, who has really helped me stay focused. Because when I tell him something and I do something else, oh, Mommy, you said this. And I could recall, my son must have been like maybe 5 years old. I thought like I love all kids, because in my home, like all the kids come, people drop their children in my home for babysitting. And then, like, I remember once, something happened where I was watching a show on TV, and one of the children there just changed the channel, and I had like a fuss, and my son said, Mommy, I do that all the time. and you don't, what's going on? He was shocked. And then I caught myself, I thought, my God, I thought I loved all children. And then I realized I actually favored my kids. It's a natural instinct. So that's why, like, I don't want people to feel uncomfortable if we need to speak the truth. If you really need to, I thought, like, I welcome the kids, I feed them and all that. And then that one thing that one child did, but thank God the divine in my son was present to keep me on track. Mm-hmm. And then I said I had to learn. It's a learning process. We have to learn to love. I may not like this, I may not like this person, but I must love.
Absolutely. It's an exercise
It's
to
an exercise.
Learn how to love children, even if they're not our own personal children, as our own. Absolutely.
Exactly. And as spiritual leaders, I constantly ask the Supreme Being for the gift of love.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you. Lahia, would you like to go next?
The work of interreligious networks have to do with something I was mentioning, the spaces created, allowed to meet people, to give them a face. That sets the difference, because this helps us value other individuals. We can value the richness, even though they're different, as individuals. So I think that a more interreligious work would be necessary, because probably the efforts on raising awareness on this issue have been done internally within our religious communities, and we have not allowed ourselves the possibility of meet interreligiously, at least not in public venues. And I think that we have the chance to make real changes. I'd like to share with you something Pope Francis said to the Latin American community. If we don't want to get lost in a sea of vacuum words, let's look at the faces of the poor, the women, and the children. Let's look at them as agents for change. Let's analyze the way they look at us. It will help us to find the method of how to act. We have to look at youths, because we can see rebelliousness needed to promote real changes. And I would like to point out something here that Melody was mentioning in the main panel. If we are putting on the shoulders of youth this very necessary issue that we have to address, it is because we are also going to take the chance as faith communities to give them the right place or space for youths, give them the chance to participate with regard to this issue. I don't think it's fair to include youths in our speeches if we're not going to give them a real chance and we're not going to help them to promote change.
Wonderful. That is absolutely right. Youth need to be at the table, and sometimes I wonder, what's the age of youth? Like when we talk about youth and engaging youth, like who are we talking about? We have to learn to really identify who are we talking about, because I think certain cultures view youth differently in terms of their age ranges, right? Like I think someone would consider me a youth, and then I look at myself and say I'm a grown man, right? And there is a difference. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Leah. Tahir, would you like to address this question?
Thanks, David. Yes, I'm going to address this question, but the way I'm going to address this question is an invitation inwards for us at this forum, first and foremost. Because if we're going to talk about being mobilized to uplift and center the voices of Afro-descendant and indigenous people, that should have been the priority of a conference and a forum like this one that didn't do that well. There should have been more people who are Afro-descendant and indigenous, especially when we are on indigenous lands, to be able to make sure they have opportunities to reflect, share perspectives, and offer insight that can be heard at the Summit of the Americas, rather than inviting someone like myself who doesn't do this topic justice, quite frankly. And this is a part of a larger conversation of forums and organizations like the ones that co-sponsored this event that unfortunately sideline a lot of these communities and unfortunately treat them as tokens. They treat them as lists on a paper that need to be checked off. And I speak this with quite honesty, and it could get me kicked out of this forum or similar things like it, but it's a reality check as well when folks like Cole, who in the opening ceremony for today, still call children the future. We are not the future. We are present, we're thriving, and we will keep knocking on the doors until we break them open. Our leadership needs to be taken seriously now. If we don't acknowledge the fact that we have power now, we will keep seeing situations like the shootings in Uvalde where our current children become children of the past. We keep facing violence. We keep facing this idea that we have to wait to be given permission to walk through the gates of being qualified to be able to become leaders. And it's an exhausting conversation. I've been talking about this conversation for 10 years and I just turned 30. I'm not even considered young in a lot of spaces anymore. Where are the voices that need to be heard right now who are taking these issues seriously, because we unfortunately are making more people victims and survivors of the very systems of injustice that we keep telling them to talk about, but rather than making them talk about it, we make them serve us coffee, we make them do our chores, and we make them run around just to do the daily routine of social media. That doesn't do anything for us. If we want to get interreligious networks that are centered on youth mobilized, then the main organizations need to center our voices, period.
Yes.
Okay, if I may add something. Sure. So, I would encourage that you bring a friend, you tell a friend, and then so on and so forth, and then you can make that voice, and so people are more aware. Yeah. Just like I said, I'm talking to my son I gave birth to, I know for 26 years, and it's like I don't know him. Right. It's like we come like almost every day in conflict where, mommy, you don't understand. So I had to pull back and realize like my time, I grew up in a different setting where my neighbor was like a parent. But now it's like it's not the same, I would say. Oh, yeah. So it's the word of mouth. It's more powerful in getting people together, because it's like we mean well, but we've been. I'll say another thing. I learned to say when my child doesn't want to eat, I will say the children in Africa don't have food, and Frederick will say, mommy, exactly, I don't want it. Send it to the children of Africa. But we keep repeating the same as, it's like what we should know and what we know are two different things. Right, right. We do what we know to do best. Yeah. Forgive us.
True, of course.
Okay? So it's like we are open to listen to you and learn from you. Okay?
And I deeply, deeply appreciate that, because I had a very similar conversation with my mom in 2020 after the death of George Floyd. I had to speak to her as an activist, and I had to speak to her as her son to talk about the realities of the injustice that African descendant and Black people in the United States face. And now she's my closest ally when I do this work. Yeah. So I know that power of the divine comes in different ways, and I'm really grateful that you brought me that reminder.
Okay.
Awesome. You know, that's beautiful. One of the things that I'm hearing us really discuss is, in holding intention, to Hill, you put it this way, a reality check. It seems like we need a reality check on a number of different fronts. And, you know, part of it as, you know, us convening this conference, we need a reality check. We need a reality check as interreligious organizations about the conversations that we're having and how we're having those conversations and with whom we're having those conversations. We need a reality check. Can we just go down the line and somewhat identify what we believe needs to be checked, what we believe needs to be brought up and really discussed?
Okay, from my experience, I always talk from what I know. Like I say, why you should know and what you know are two different things, and you do what you know. Like what I realized is that living and then the mainstream media is not helping. So a lot of our kids are exposed to social media, and they don't read much more like we used to, my generation. And they are hearing all type of incidents and death and mass shooting and this has an impact on the brain. It captures. And then you have fear, and then like we worry that you're going to be the next one in line. So I've been thinking, it's like creating a space. We don't have, my home is a space where my kids' friends feel comfortable coming to my home. So we can try with ourselves. Like a deck of cards, none are the same. They may resemble the same symbols, but each card has its own role to play. So we need to try to play this role. If you don't have access to a lot of people to tell your story to yourself. Write yourself a story, or go to the water, go to the park, because we need to find ways to heal so we can connect. Because it's like in electricity, if the wires are dirty, electricity can't go through. So it's the same thing as a black person, Afro-descendant. I call myself Haitian plus black, okay? Because as Haitian, you hear on the mainstream media all the stuff that I don't need to repeat here. So we need to start with ourselves. Write yourself your story, tell yourself your story, and once you alleviate that pain and release what you don't need, we don't need to be remembered sufferings. If we don't have access to mediation or to mental health service, we can try to heal ourselves by being true to ourselves. What bothers me? Try to learn ourselves first, and then, like as I would say, my experience being a divine person, we connect.
Yeah.
When we see each other, I look at your face, I can feel, I can read you. Because what I notice now, there's so much going on. I may be sitting next to you, I can feel you. Do you understand? But if you try to cleanse yourself, release what you don't need, if it is painful, why do you want to hold on to it? Okay? So, and then if I do any wrong to you, forgive me. Because if I know better, I should do better. And you have no control over my action. You can't make me love you. You can't make me hate you. But you have control over you, what you're going to allow my action, what impact you're going to allow my action to do on you. Then, like, you do something, oh, okay, if you know better, you do better. If you're at peace, you share peace. If you're happy, you share happiness.
Absolutely.
That's the best I can tell you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. What reality checks do we need, Lahia?
I think that something Florence was saying, it is very important because stories are very powerful. We know many stories, but not all. But I think that in our hearts, we have to start knowing all the stories and to be ready to share them, because the perception that we have of others have to do with this. It has to do with the story of that person or of those peoples. So I believe that it is necessary that communities share the stories, that we help to disseminate the stories of those who are underprivileged, those that didn't have the chance to tell their stories.
Absolutely. Storytelling is so important. That's exactly right. Tia?
Um, I think there are a couple of reality checks, and I think dear Mambo here and Lihia kind of centered that in remembering that each of us has a story. Storytelling is one of the oldest arts that we can trace back for all of our communities. And if we're going to invite folks from various communities to represent themselves, whether they're from different religious communities, ethnic communities, different age groups, and the like, don't let their story be the definition of the communities that they come from. Let them define their own experiences for what they are. Oftentimes, we get really flabbergasted by this idea that we might see someone who we've filled into this box that, oh, because you identify as Hindu, you believe these things, you do these things, you say these things, and that's what you are. But we often forget that no person exists in a monolith with their traditions and their communities. They may share similar beliefs, they may share similar core principles or values, but they don't all have the same experience. You don't talk to me as a Muslim born and raised in, a Hindu born and raised in Los Angeles, to another Hindu born in India, to another Hindu born in the Netherlands. We're not going to have all of the same experiences, but we'll definitely have stuff that connects us. You have to remember that when you invite people into the room, they're not a checkbox to be filled out. They're not a quota to be filled. They're an opportunity to learn and to gain insight and wisdom about a tradition and about a person who experiences the tradition, who lives it on the daily. Another reality check that we need when we do the work of interfaith cooperation is that we're not doing enough. We really are not doing enough. I've been in a lot of spaces where the work of interfaith is very dialogical. And dialogue is the center of where all of this work starts. But if the conversation remains consistent, if the conversation remains with the same people, if the conversation remains conversation, it's more of a book club at the end of the day. It's more of a monthly dinner. It's more of a opportunity to build a beloved community that starts in a very small community. But if we want to see that create ripples, it has to do things that are more courageous. It has to do things that make it step outside of its space of comfort. And most importantly, I think it has to also acknowledge the truth that it's very hard to be all-inclusive. We can't be inclusive of everyone. Humanity is a very complicated thing. And sometimes our view of tolerance can also be being too tolerant, that it allows us to be able to create space of discomfort to marginalized communities. And we need to draw a line sometimes as to how we can create that reconciliation. We can't force people to reconcile with each other. You don't ask victims and survivors of sexual assault to meet with their perpetrators so that they both reconcile. That's not how that process works. And you can't expect all marginalized communities to follow things that way when there has not been a standard of accountability or justice or equity made for them to even enter the space in the first place. Because if I'm expected to go into a room and do interfaith work, and you expect me to do that work with the condition that any of my identities can't be centered, the work, you've left me out, actually. In essence, you've left me out. And it's not to say that it must be put on everyone to learn everything at that very moment. The point of listening to stories, the point of using concepts like active listening to ask more questions and to learn deeper, make a profound impact on how we make those connections so that we learn better, so that the bridges are actually resilient. They're not made from Q-tips that can just fall apart the chance that we get. We want them to be resilient. We want them to be sustainable, because in some cases, it starts with us, and it should endure until we pass on.
Oh, thank you. Yes, we have questions in the audience. Yes, sir. I have a microphone coming to you. Just one moment.
Thank you. It's a very rich conversation. I'm João Diniz from World Vision, Latin America. I was just as a reality check in Latin America, we see that the youth, more and more, they are losing the trust and the credibility in terms of the institutions, including the religions institutions, you know? If we see some of the investigations or studies has shown this, that more and more they are just leaving, but doesn't mean that they are losing their faith, their belief, and also doesn't mean that they are not engaged in causes, in social movement. Even they are doing this, and more powerful and stronger than our institutions when we try to do this, because they use their own mechanisms like the social media and the capacity of convening or mobilizing others. My question is, as institutions, interfaith institutions, how can we understand better this phenomenon and how we can develop better strategy or actions to engage them, to understand and to engage them? Because I think that's critical to enhance our capacity to tackle some of these issues like climate change, racism, violence against children, and so on. Thank you.
We'll take this question first, and then we'll come to you.
Mine's related.
Oh, it's related. Okay,
Yeah,
you can add on to it.
I mean, it was very similarly. I had two, but one was very related. So one of them was going to be, you know, this, so you've talked about the networks and youth, and I was wondering how, having two young adult children myself, who see what I do, but are not interested, perhaps, in taking this on for some of the same reasons or other reasons. So how do you invite them into this space, and how do you make it attractive to them? Because as someone said, right, these issues are going to be their issues to tackle, right? We're unfortunately passing on a lot of this to them. So that was one, so very similar. And then can I ask the other one, and we can take
Sure.
it? Yeah. Because we've asked this question of how do you define youth, and also because Tahil has, you know, rightly acknowledged the lands that we're on and the lack of indigenous voices here. And one of the things, you know, that they were very strong in their traditions were these rites of passage from youth to adulthood, which we are missing these days, which, you know, brings a lot of this disenfranchisement that I think you're speaking to. Like, what are rites of passage in this day and age, in your opinion?
Thank you. Let's take the first question first, around, you know, youth aren't necessarily losing their faith in God or their own personal sense of faith, but rather faith in the institution. And then how do we begin to, as I'm thinking, assuming this is from the perspective of the institution, invite youth in? Who would like to take that first? I'm going to take a moment to answer. I actually have a thought about that. One of the things around, I know for myself going to church, is that institutions want to be safe. Institutions don't allow themselves to be vulnerable. And when you don't create a space of vulnerability, institutions can come off as very stiff and stale and not willing to push the margins, because you want to remain an institution. You want to remain steadfast. But in today's day and age, I would argue that young people are looking for spaces where they can be fully themselves, where they can show up as themselves. We call these safe spaces, right? And institutions often don't know how to create safe spaces. They know how to create safe spaces that only keep the institution safe, and not necessarily a safe space for a young person. And that looks and feels different. The definition of vulnerability is to make yourself exposed to harm. Institutions don't want to make themselves exposed to harm. And so I think we first have to have an understanding of what vulnerability is, what young people are really looking for, and then being courageous enough to step into that as an organization, as a church, as a denomination, as whatever. Plug in the word. Those are my thoughts.
In 2018, the Catholic Church had a reflection process about youth. All around the world, there was a reflection process about youth, but in no other space of reflection, there were also other spaces to involve youth. And I think this has a unique value because there's no doubt that our religious institutions, well, they have done things that they shouldn't have done. Let's put it that way. And young people are asking for coherence from faith institutions. This is something important for us. And hence, I believe that our communities, our religious communities, should also be open to listen to those things young people are asking, because very often they don't find those spaces open. We would like to see changes. We would like to see our communities get to a point of realities where they are needed. And we don't see that often. And it's necessary to open spaces to listen to the voice of the youth and be taken seriously, because very often they are often for a photo opportunity, right? Or to give some drinks or work a little bit. They are not the ones there when decisions are being taken. So we cannot expect youth to be involved if we don't take them seriously, if they are only there to be beautiful in a picture opportunity, right? So I think we need to rethink precisely that. And I go back to what you were saying. So this issue is racism, but from interreligious cooperation of youth. So we're putting the weight of this issue on the issue of youth. If we're putting this on the youth shoulders, it should mean that we give resources and we give spaces to them to help change that reality. If we don't take them seriously, then that's not going to happen.
Yeah, if I may add something, just like my fellow panelists just said, like racism is economical. It's not a matter of feelings. It's economic. And who are the parents of these youths that we are here to address? Okay? So there's, I think it's a subject of a larger conversation, bigger conversation, if we want to go to the core of the issues. And with my experience, I was privileged and blessed enough to be able to have the time to wake up my children every day before they go to school, drop them in school, and after school to ask about their days. Still, they don't tell me everything that happened in school. And if there's an issue, I will go to the school to find out what's going on. And sometimes I say, no, mommy, I'm only telling you this. I don't want you to go. But I acknowledge it's a privilege. Not every parent has that privilege, because as we know, comfort, whatever needs to be created, should be at home first, and not send a broken child to school, and not. But society has become such. I don't have a definition, because I try not to say any negative word. I can find a positive thing to say what society has become. Still, we are grateful that we are at least discussing it. I think it's economic. We need the resources. We need a distribution of resources. And I can add that, like, it's not like doing charity. There's no such thing as charity. It's an obligation to make sure, like, I have what I need to live comfortably. The earth is everybody's heritage, and some of us claim everything while some have nothing. So people don't understand we're doing this, so I'm nice, no, I learned that, like, it's not being nice. I have the obligation to make sure I share my talent, I share my resources, and the resources should be shared with whoever needs it the most. If you need it more than I do, you get it. It's like not saving millions of dollars, investing money, and then your neighbor is starving. So it's like it's deep. It's really like, that's all I can say. But we have the obligation to share our talent and resources. And whoever is receiving at the other end, all you need is to be grateful. Like the Supreme Being wants us to be grateful for the blessings. But if the great being put all that, look at like sand, there's abundance for all of us. If we stop being so self-centered, that wealth needs to be shared. It's not a matter like you own the world. We are part of the world. Yes, so I think it's an economic issue too.
Yeah, I think definitely leaning into the points that my colleagues made. A lot of the relevance that comes with talking about the institutions of religion and the role that they play in retention, basically, in building community. One of the things that we are seeing in the United States, particularly, is the fact that there are a lot of people leaving mainstream institutions to either go to other ones, to not be a part of an institution at all and just be spiritually oriented, or to actually become atheist because they have been so scarred and traumatized by the experience of religion and the institution that they want no part of it. I have many, many colleagues that joined interfaith work, but initially were anti-theists because they had this very negative idea of religion and spirituality only being a devastating factor, because they were never exposed to the idea that there is another reality out there. Many of them met me, met their colleagues, met other folks of faith and spirituality who proved otherwise, which gave them not a sense that they need to be religious or spiritual, not that we need to force them, but that there are good people out there who do practice. And when you live in a reality where religion is a two-sided coin, where it can be disastrous or it can be deeply beneficial, how do you make sure that you're making people realize that there are two sides of a coin? You don't just show one side. This is not how that works. What you have to do is make people acknowledge truths for how they exist. We know this manipulation of faith. We know this manipulation of spirituality because it looks like so many different things. All of our traditions have that history. There's a truth there. If you don't let people learn about that, then people will be living in the dark. If we're not starting off with the basics of that idea of storytelling, that this is a religion, this religion has baggage, but this religion has a lot of good things. It's not actually that hard to tell people that, to make them understand that they have personal decisions to make about how that expression looks when they see the world, when they're in the world. It helps with their purpose. It helps them with their understanding of relationship to others. It makes a big difference when you open the horizons to understand that there is an A through Z experience of faith. But when we also look at it from the context of the work that we're doing as interreligious communities, or in trying to make sure that the voice and the commitment of youth is centered, it makes me think about, Sister Christina, something you had mentioned yesterday on the panel in talking about ensuring that women and girls have equal rights. A lot of this has to do with men letting go. There are a lot of men in power that don't want to let go. And they have to, or else they will get forced out. That is the point that we're trying to get down to. We're not saying anything about violence, but at the end of the day, we are humans, and therefore we are impermanent. No wealth, no values, no part of you that you bring into this world is going with you. It is just your soul. Learn from that and acknowledge that. I think, to answer a bit of the second part of your rite of passage, is that a part of the rite of passage to ensure that young people get involved is that leadership actually changes on a consistent basis, that allows people who are able to actually get to points of leadership can do so without this idea that, oh, I'm taking care of this baby of a project and it's only mine to lead. Let young people, entrust them with the power and the resources to be able to do the right things. there are opportunities to help create more pipelines for young people that either they don't know about them because they're not told, or because they don't exist. And if more institutions, religious and interreligious alike, can ensure that those exist and that they're doing every single effort that they can to bring young people there, I promise you, you will have a more thriving religious institution and a more thriving interreligious movement.
That's real. And the reason that I say that is because my pastor, he talks about this quite often. He's in his mid-40s. He says the average age of a Christian pastor is like mid-60s. 15 years ago, it was mid-40s. In the early days of the Bible, it was like 19. We've only gone higher and higher and higher in terms of who's leading the institutions. And so there is this idea of letting go. And that's scary. Mm-hmm. Speaking of, not necessarily letting go, but I just want to do a quick transition here. We've been talking a lot about youth. I kind of want to get into some dialogue around anti-racism work as interfaith communities, and how our interfaith work around anti-racism efforts is complementary to the work of states and international organizations. Where do you see we have some alignment or some similarities or some common practices or work that we're doing, and perhaps how can we strengthen that?
I would say same thing, dialogue, so we can identify. Like I'm like between Haiti and the States, but religion is not perceived the same way as back home. Like we have like ministers preaching hate, and they like, if I may say, it's like they're telling their parishioners, like human beings like them are evil, and they need to be taken out. And it's not the gospel of Christ. So, like as a Vodou person, like I grew up in the Christian faith, I was Catholic. And like when they're talking to me about like what's going on, I said, all we do is first of utmost importance. Life, being, is to be respected. It doesn't matter if you're good, bad. That's not for me to judge if you're a good person, if you're a bad person. And then we have that resignation. They tell you to accept yourself as such, being poor and hungry. And that's not right. You understand? So there's really this issue. It's also the issue of letting go. And like we have millions of stories in the Bible. As the Bible I look at is the sacred book for some faith. For me, it's a book about relationships. There's everything in them where it says it's difficult for people with a lot of money to go through heaven, because there's something about money. We need to make money a tool, a serving tool. Money cannot be your master. You understand? And then I realized the more you have money, the more you want to hold on to money. People with money don't give. Generally speaking. That's why we call generous rich people. Generous rich people. We can be surrounding with people very wealthy, and then like you can pay your rent. And then they don't want to hear it. Because if they know you're dealing with any type of financial issue, they look at you that you may be stealing from them. They stay away from you. Mm-hmm. That's the reality within my community. You don't want to hear like no food, no money for transportation. Mm-hmm. No, I don't have time for that. Mm-hmm. They can even, I work places where people will go complain to management about their personal issue, and next thing you know, they all let go.
So it sounds like there is a lot of room for opportunity in terms of, how we deal with the marginalized communities, the communities that are economically impacted, and so absolutely.
Exactly.
Could I add on to that, David?
Sure.
I think there's absolutely a point to be noted about rich people and rich institutions and the way that they use money. When a faith community has more money than other countries do, you kind of have to question the priorities of what they're using the money for. And if it's not to benefit the poor, if it's not to benefit the marginalized and oppressed, then you are creating a cash cow, you're creating the golden calf, you're not doing the work of God. And I come from, a tradition like Sikhism that historically is seen as one of the traditions that serves unconditionally. We have temples around the world that do nothing but serve people food, that create hospitals, that are focused on making sure that the lowest of the low are equalized and they're not just served. And there's a big difference between those two things, because the idea of charity to just give to people will make the person feel like a philanthropist, and only that person actually benefits in the greater process. If you're not changing the systems of how an economy continues to keep them at the lowest of the low, and you don't learn to break the cycle of poverty that exists, you're not actually serving them. You're not actually being genuinely charitable. And we live in a city like Los Angeles whose disparity when it comes to the economy is quite ridiculous. And I mean, fully ironic for the moment that we're having this forum only blocks away from what is considered one of the most marginalized areas of the United States, which is Skid Row, where hundreds, if not thousands of people live on the road. You just have to walk 4 or 5 blocks away to see what is the equivalent of 10 cities. If we're not acknowledging that us as faith communities here talking about these deep issues can't just go there to be able to serve people, but not just serve them one time and leave, but make sure that every one of them is housed, what are faith communities doing exactly? I don't know.
But could it be because of that issue of separation with church and state?
That's a
Because
part of
it's
it.
like, that's what I said, it's a subject for a bigger, greater conversation, and
Right.
people are really going to get uncomfortable.
Sure,
And they may just walk out,
sure.
or just
We
sit
should
on
have that
the floor.
conversation. Let's see if they
Yeah.
walk out. No.
No, exactly, no, it's like, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And scary.
Right.
Because, like I learned, the more money you have, then there's something, because we are within faith-based discussion. So I can bring in my abstract, if I may say. Like, there's something with money. The more you have money, and then you have that feeling of, if I were to lose that money, then you try to hold on to it. Then you don't want to invest. Then you have too much knowledge, too much information telling you if you invest here, you may get less, and here and there. All that needs to be addressed, because this is a new world. They talk about new world order, but this is a new present. We have no challenges that we have to deal with. We just lived through COVID-19, and like my friends say, if I have a mouth to talk, I should be talking about positive things, just the fact to be alive. But how did I survive? How did other people survive? So it's like we really need to, like, be ourselves. In being ourselves, we can connect with each other, and we can address the issue at their core, and then act on it. We need to act on it. And then, like, when I'm helping, doing whatever I'm doing, I find people approaching me, telling me I'm doing too much. If you see somebody do too much, then that's that person's mission to do too much. People want to warn you and counsel you about like saving, not giving, not helping. Don't go here, don't go there. Like I'm a child of the universe. If I were to die here, then let me just go and die. You know, we have that. Sometimes we want to be ourselves and live our purpose, because each one of us has a purpose. And then, like, I want to point something, like, whatever a person is doing, it could be just that. I can just be here to bring an idea, and you will be the one to make it real. You will be the one to materialize it. Because once an idea is in the air, it's everybody's property. So we need to identify, what do I have to do?
Yeah.
And then, like, don't worry about me. If you see me, oh, she's wasting her resources. No, I'm just here to show like I'm a beautiful black person. You understand? And then take it from there. Don't ask too much of me. You don't know what God places in me. You don't know what God gives me to do. I can just be here to go around and show vanity. Vanity comes from God. Beauty, that's, like being real. It's just me.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're here to talk to me, if you're here to teach, teach.
Yeah.
If you're here to sweep the floor, sweep the floor.
Exactly.
If you're here to bring the word, bring the word.
Right.
We need to identify our purpose, our mission, and act on it. We need to act on whatever. If I do my share, you do your share, then before you know it, we'll be living in a better world.
No, I appreciate that. Lahia, would you like to add anything to this conversation?
Florence, you were previously saying that it is necessary to have a dialogue. I think that there are no fixed recipes. We have to look at each reality and respond to this reality, but we have to find a way to collaborate to solve the issues and collaborate with the different states, because it is a reality that the territories with our indigenous peoples and African descendants have limitations, have limited access to utilities and opportunities. So I was saying this at the beginning. Sometimes we have been silent with regard to these topics, and we have not been present in the spaces where we should have been or acted. I think we need to be present where we're needed and have a stronger voice.
Thank you so much. One of the things that I imagine when I ask this question around anti-racist efforts with communities of faith and how they're complementary to the state or international organizations, I assume that there's going to be a positive spin on this, right? But what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there is so much more opportunity that we are not addressing. And perhaps that really speaks to the state of our society right now, where it's just like the state isn't doing enough, the international organizations aren't doing enough, and faith communities, we're not doing enough. And I appreciate you all's sentiments around that, and really even challenging me to reconsider how I'm thinking about what complementary means. Complementary isn't always in the positive. Complementary can also be to push marginalized people even further into the margins. So I appreciate that dialogue. And then finally, as we begin to wrap up here, if we can think of an ideal scenario, right? Not where we are, but where we want to go. What would be the role of faith communities in promoting healing and promoting reconciliation in the Americas? What would you hope to see in our interfaith communities in promoting healing and reconciliation in the world? What would that look like for you?
For me, I would say that we all know who is doing the work, who is doing the right thing. And I feel like the government, from wherever, should be able to help and give them full support. They can identify who is doing wrong and who is not supposed to do what. I think they should support like community leaders, religious leaders who are actually doing the work. We all know what's going on. And I say like I bless the American president because I say every day he is of age, he's very knowledgeable, he knows what's going on in the world. So I just hope that he gets the courage to do the right thing because he is of age to do the right thing.
It's not that they are the beneficiaries of our actions. They have been resilient and brave individuals to fight against adversity. And this is something we have to start recognizing or acknowledging. And secondly, something that I mentioned earlier, we have to be aware of what we as faith communities have done wrong and apologize when we have acted wrongly. There is a gap there that we have built ourselves, and it is necessary to start building bridges for reconciliation. We need to admit that we made mistakes and apologize and be there and give a helping hand when needed.
Thank you so much. And finally, to Hill.
Yeah, I would echo exactly what my colleague Ligia said. Your apology has to be genuine, and you have to make sure you don't repeat the patterns of behavior that have now institutionalized injustice and oppression. Fix it, mean it, and step away from the spaces that allow us to be able to actually recuperate from this loss and make us feel like you're accomplices for justice, not just allies in the work. You can't expect a wound to heal if the sword is still inside. Take out the sword and let it heal. And I think to complement, I think some of the earlier things that were said before, that apology, not only is it long overdue, it almost might not seem like it's necessary. But from a government like the United States, that culture has developed really well. We are very unapologetic about doing the wrong things. And I think that needs to change. From the government to religious institutions to anyone who anticipates this idea that they don't have to apologize for doing something wrong, even if it wasn't in their hands, if it was a generational reality, we don't have to apologize for anything. Start with the sorry and mean it. If you can start there, there's a lot that you can change. And there will be trust that you can gain from the people who were marginalized in the process too.
Wow, thank you so much. There is richness in your truth, whether it be good, whether it be bad, be who you are and stand up as an institution, as a government, as individuals, and as communities. Can we give a round of applause to our panelists? You all were absolutely amazing. I hope that people will be healed, work can be pushed forward to do good, because it's the good thing to do. And with that, thank you, everyone. We'll see you in the next session.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.